İran karabte. İşu. Didda.
So none of us here can actually speak any of those languages. In fact, none of us even knew that these languages even existed. And I'm pretty sure most of you are also not aware of these languages. But I do not blame you. So linguists say roughly 5,000 to 6,000 unique languages are spoken in the world today. But a century from now, this number will almost certainly fall to the low thousands or even the hundreds. And if you do the math properly, this means about 10% of the total languages spoken today are lost. But this may not seem like a huge issue to a lot, but losing a language means losing one's identity and culture. In most cases, people don't change because they want to, but because they are forced to. Language is just a tool to convey greetings, share thoughts, and share feelings, and most of the time share emotions. And when a person is forced to do all of this in an alien language that he's not used to, he won't be able to do any of this properly, which means he can't share his feelings and emotions with everyone like before. So what we want to do is to find the relation between globalization, how it contributes to the disappearance of various languages.
I wanted to choose this topic because globalization is a very big issue and it ultimately leads to the loss of many languages. This sounds like a devastating and dreadful idea, but the sad fact is we're making it true. Everywhere we go, let it be the market, school, or any other place that has many people, we tend to talk only English and we leave the mother tongue behind. And then there's one more extreme, which is mainly caused due to globalization, which is the bilingual culture. And a best example would be like a country like Singapore. And I'm from Singapore and I knew a little bit of Tamil, but that Tamil wasn't like the proper one because it had a lot of Mandarin and Malay components. And once when I moved back into India, a more Tamil speaking community is when I actually understood the mother tongue. So this helped me gel better with the people around me and surrounding me. I feel not many people know this because they think globalization is a very good thing that helps the world economic GDP grow and all that. But this has very little limelight, and I think raising more awareness on this should be really helpful.
I like this topic because this topic has affected me on a personal level. Considering the fact that I was out of India for the past 14 years, the moment I came in, I found it really difficult to even communicate with the local people with the native language, which is Tamil. However, after living here for the past 2 years, I'm slowly getting into that groove, and this project I hope will make me more aware and rather incentivize me to pick up this language.
Hello everyone. So as you might have noticed, all of us follow a similar pattern. We come from a different country and we've all ended up here in India with our mother tongues. Myself, I come from Dubai and I've lived there for the past 13 years. My mother tongue too is Tamil and I struggle to speak it. And personally, I feel that this topic will really help me to better understand the roots of my mother tongue, and also it will help make others aware of how important it is to ensure that they preserve their native languages. Thank you.
So for all those who are unaware about what globalization is, we will start with the definition. It describes the way countries and people of the world interact and integrate. For instance, let us imagine a group of people living on an island. Their food choices are limited to seafood. The habitants do not mind it, but they are soon tired of their limited choice. As the modes of transport improve, trade between countries and islands strengthen, and the island now has a wider range of delicacies to choose from.
Now, let's look at an example of how globalization leads to the loss of languages. If we look at the earth, not every country has equal opportunities than the other. Some countries have more while some have relatively fewer. If we take the case of the UAE, for example, 20 years ago, perhaps the UAE would have not been the favorable destination if you're looking for a job. But today, the UAE is one of the more developed countries in the world, and it houses some of the world's tallest skyscrapers and the world's largest mall, the Dubai Mall. It's nicknamed the land of opportunities, and with good reason also. Well, let's say a speaker of Hindi from India decides to move to Dubai looking for a better job. Let's say he's found one and he's settled there and he's happy with what he's doing. But behind the scenes, he is slowly losing out on his mother tongue as he begins to converse in one of the more common languages. Well, let's say English in this case. Moreover, he loses out on his culture and traditions, and when he returns back to his hometown, he's unable to, well, speak with his folks fluently. Well, we took the example of one person in this case. While this happens to nearly every person around the world who moves to a different country, so clearly that's a big number, and the issue is more magnified than we think it is.
Moving on from that, we're going to show you video clips that we've collected from our friends and acquaintances who have experienced the same phenomenon.
Hi, my name is Viraj Krodekar and I study in Dubai, and I speak Konkani at home, which is the language of Goa. Now, I've been staying in Dubai for around 9 years, and I have many friends, and so I have to converse with them in English. And even in schools, the teachers teach most of the subjects in English in most of the abroad countries. So most of the lives of the children are spent in speaking English, and very less time is given to speaking their mother tongue. This leads to the children forgetting or being less fluent in their mother tongue language. Now, in my case, I'm pretty fluent in my language because despite being exposed to the language English for in most of my life, I have given enough time to speaking my mother tongue in with my family members or with my relatives that my vocabulary is pretty good, as my parents continuously correct me, as they are pretty fluent, so they continuously correct me in my language, thus making me much better. But it depends all on the person of how much time that person spends on speaking that mother tongue. In my case, I have spent enough time to speak my language, that's Konkani, but in certain cases, the person might end up coming home and continue speaking in English. And that is the reason the mother tongue dies out.
Hi, my name is Sweta Rajesh, and I'm an Indian who was born and raised in the United States. My English is definitely my go-to language when I'm talking to someone, because I talk to my friends in English, my family that lives in the United States, I talk to all of them in English. So Tamil is definitely not the first language that I go to speak in. But however, when I am in India and I'm talking to my relatives that speak Tamil and can't speak English, I do talk to them in Tamil. It's definitely harder for me to speak in Tamil because I don't speak it very often and I'm not very fluent in it, but I do know how to speak it. I understand it very well, and sometimes I can understand it and then I will respond back in English because I'm not sure how to say those words in Tamil. The longer I'm away from India and the longer I'm not speaking Tamil, it's harder for me to start speaking it again because I don't talk in it very often. And it's just not like the first language that I go to speak to people in. But Tamil, it comes to me, but I don't know how to say very many words in Tamil. And that's just because I wasn't raised in India, so I didn't grow up speaking Tamil and having to learn English as my second language in school.
My name is Shashank Bhagwatula, and I'm an Indian American living in Dallas, Texas. I believe that we don't speak our mother tongues often because at school we are surrounded by a more diverse group of people rather than India. In this case, this widens the gap between the mother tongue and the more fluent language here, which is English, which is the main reason why we do not mainly speak in our mother tongue outside of our house.
Hi, I'm Sanjay. I'm a person of Indian origin staying in Singapore now. I think the main challenge for speaking in mother tongue in Singapore is the fact that Singapore is a multicultural society with people who speak many different languages, and in that regard, it's purely inconvenient for us to speak in our mother tongues, and it is more preferable for us to speak in English, which is a language that all of us do understand. So that makes it easier for me to speak in English to my friends and my teachers, rather than speaking in Tamil, which is my mother tongue.
Languages are an essential medium by which We communicate across cultures and develop ourselves. Knowledge of one or several other languages helps us to perceive new horizons and think more globally. This increases the understanding of ourselves and our neighbors. Since there are so many imperial languages, it's near impossible to label just one as the most rarest or the most endangered one. But there are at least 100 languages around the world that have only a handful of speakers. It can be difficult to find speakers who speak minority languages, as most of them are quite old and they won't be very healthy. Hence, they won't be able to advertise their language or talking skills, and it won't be passed on through generations. Also, even if there are younger speakers of the language, they might be living far away from each other, and it'll be quite hard to converse, and they would lose fluency in the language, which makes its whole existence quite hard. Migration has played a large role in language change and language death. When speakers of Proto-Indo-European heritage migrated to most of Europe and large parts of Asia between 6,000 and 8,000 years ago, they probably brought about massive language changes and language death.
Half of the world's estimated 6,000 plus languages will likely die out by the end of the century without urgent efforts to protect minority communities and their languages. Language is a central element and expression of identity and of key importance in the preservation of group identity, as mentioned by the UN independent expert on minority issues. Language is particularly important to linguistic minority communities seeking to maintain their distinct group and cultural identity, sometimes under conditions of marginalization, exclusion, and discrimination. There are many reasons why languages die. The reasons are often political, economic, or cultural in nature. Speakers of a minority language may, for example, decide that it's better for their children's future to teach them a language that is tied to economic success. For example, the vast majority of second-generation immigrants to the United States do not speak their parents' languages fluently. It is economically and culturally more beneficial to speak English. We also lose memory of the planet's many histories and cultures, and some of the best local resources for combating environmental threats. The real tragedy of all this might just be all of the people who find themselves unable to speak their first language, the language they learned how to describe the world in. Some find themselves in the unenviable position of being one of the few speakers of their mother tongue. And some, like many of Canada's Indigenous people, find their language in grave danger as a result of a campaign by the government to stamp out their cultures. As communities lose their language, they often also lose their cultural traditions which are tied to that language, such as songs, myths, and poetry that are not easily transferred to another language. This may, in turn, affect their sense of identity, producing a weakened social cohesion as their values and traditions are replaced with new ones. This is sometimes characterized as anomy. Losing a language may also have political consequences, as some countries confer different political statuses or privileges on minority ethnic groups, often defining ethnicity in terms of language. That means that communities that lose their language may also lose political legitimacy as a community with special collective rights.
Indigenous languages are struggling to survive. With the number of indigenous language speakers on the decline, some of these languages are on the verge of extinction. The knowledge and beauty locked up in these languages is irreplaceable. Every language is a multi-generational creative act. In a world where globalization is taking place at a rapid rate, our group has come up with a solution which integrates the advanced technology in today's world and people's own literature by writing new books and poems. By using computers and other digital technology, this reduces the cost, speeds up the process, and it is much more eco-friendly. To attract more people to read these books and translations, English transcripts could be provided so that more people can read it. At a later stage, this may even motivate more people to learn these languages, and this will increase the number of speakers globally. This course of action has a lot of economic benefits. Due to the nature of this issue, we cannot come up with a short-term solution because it will be ineffective and unachievable. This long-term solution will definitely have an impact on society because a lot of people would like to know different perspectives of different things in today's world.
A few questions were sent out to around 81 people from different countries. The first few questions were asked to find out on how people identify themselves and what they associate with. And then they were asked to define globalization, for which we got a variety of answers. This was key, as the next question was to test if they actually knew what they meant, and this influenced the next few answers too. Many people didn't want to learn a new language, but the ones who did were inclined towards learning French and Spanish. The last few questions were asked to see how often they used English.